You're good.
Okay, so this is the July 13th meeting of the Security Working Group. To announce anything else? That's good. So let's go. Does everybody have the Google Doc, the notes open or available?
Yep.
Last name, Josh?
What's that?
Your last name?
Brown white. Or you could use beige or taupe or tan. Any of them work for me.
Danny?
Hello, hey everyone. Sorry for
What's your last name?
Danny Grander. Grander. I actually tried joining in from my phone, but I couldn't. I don't know, trying to join.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's anything to review in the last meeting. Let me just check. So it's the first thing on the agenda. No, I don't think so. Okay, so should we just go on? Do we need some introductions? Does everybody know each other? Danny, would you like introductions or?
I think from previous meeting, I'm familiar with.
I think we're all here too.
Well, there is not too many of us here, so we can do quick introductions. Joining late, so I can start here. My name is Danny Grander. I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. I'm doing security research at Sneak, and at Sneak we joined the Node Foundation, but also been doing the research around vulnerabilities in NPM packages. So that's my main focus currently.
Okay, Josh.
I'm Josh Brown White. I work at Microsoft's Trustworthy Computing division. Kind of among our charters are kind of assisting in open source security across the ecosystem. And since Microsoft has a fairly decent usage of Node.js, I'm here to help out in whatever way I can.
Right, I'm Michael Dawson. I'm with IBM. I work in the runtime technologies team that's responsible for building Node.js for IBM, use in our products like Bluemix, as well as other packages, as well as community member, collaborator, TSC member, CTC member, that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'm Sam. I also work at IBM Runtime Technology with Michael. Nothing else to say.
I'm Colin, based out of Pittsburgh in the United States. I work on Node Core, libv, and some other things like that.
Okay, so the only thing on the agenda that I had was to go through the open issues on the security working group. There's some, and find what things we can get some action on. Can I share a screen? If I share a screen, will that be shared, Michael? Or?
Yep. I also thought that there's just something I'll bring up in terms of Well, I won't go into it, but I'd like to add to the agenda, which is just talking about defining some of the security release processes.
Add it up to the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. So, oh, I'm not sharing the screen. Hold on a second. Where's that screen share? That's unworkable, isn't it? So the first one is security working group meeting that we're having right now. So I don't know. We don't have to talk about it anymore. This is kind of a little bit blocked on. We need a little bit more work on the database, but I'd like to have the node vulnerabilities themselves listed somewhere. And I'm willing to work on that. I just need a data structure into which to put the information. I don't know if that. Does anybody have any comments on that? I think it's a terrible idea. Has it been tried before?
So I think it's worth being consistent with the the vulnerabilities donated by NSP. Of course, the structure will be a bit different, but I think like we should aim for some consistency there. And also, I think RubySec is one that has both. Is an example of a Git repository holding vulnerabilities both for the runtime itself and the packages. So they have some kind of convention there, so we can refer there.
Okay. Is it rubysec.org or?
It's rubysec.org, but it seems like it leads to a GitHub repo. So let me just double check. Yeah, rubysec.com actually. But it's basically github.com/rubysec, and there the Ruby advisory DB. So I'll just share a link. Can you see that?
Yep.
Perfect. So, well, the way they do it is they have like a folder for rubies and folder for gems. So, basically holding the same repo, but under two different folders.
Okay. Cool. So that's kind of needs a place to put vulnerabilities. So I could start to kind of collect them from the history, the changelog history. Josh, did you open this one? Activity seems to petered out. Can we close this, or is
Oh yeah, go right ahead. Yeah.
Let's see. Josh Gav was interested in the vulnerabilities API. I mean, I think the general consensus, I don't think it's worth closing if anybody's interested in working on it. He might be. It wasn't, as I understand it, it wasn't the original intention of the Node Foundation to host the data in an API accessible way. But I don't. That doesn't mean that anybody can't do it if they want to. I don't think. Colin or Michael, do you have any feelings about that? Whether we want to API endpoints?
So originally, I thought we were going to develop an API, and I was told that that wasn't the intention, and we didn't want to step on anyone like NSP or SNCC's toes. So we were basically just going to host the data, and then anyone that wanted to build on top of that could do so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. From my perspective, I don't know if there was an agreement like not to do that at all. I don't think though that it's the priority of the foundation to do that necessarily. There's other things to get in line first, right?
You think we should leave it open, or just say this doesn't seem like it's a priority right now? I mean,
Yeah,
maybe it doesn't.
I would do both. Leave it open and say it's not top priority.
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
So I opened this because as my understanding is, the security triage has run into questions about what is a security vulnerability or what is not. And I think that came up with the recent security release as well, because there's some things that are V8 vulnerabilities, or V8 considers some vulnerabilities in the JavaScript implementation, but Node doesn't because they're not remotely exploitable. You can't run JavaScript remotely on a Node server. Hopefully.
Yeah, not untrusted. You can't inject your own untrusted code.
Right, and if you do, your problems are not vulnerabilities in the V8 engine, but fs.n and friends.
Right, exactly.
Does anybody think that we need to try and write up a statement of this anywhere? Like, is it a problem for the security triage group not having a clear description of what is or is not a vulnerability? Or is the status quo just kind of okay?
Do we have a fairly consistent group of people doing the security triage? I mean, if so, then kind of an informal approach is likely fine. But if there is, rotation of folks, then it's probably worth documenting.
I think the group is fairly consistent. This was brought up a little bit by, I think, Dan in particular. So there's some specific examples. For instance, when people find that they can segfault Node through direct use of the binding layer, is that a vulnerability or just an unfortunate bug? So Dan feels that it's a vulnerability, whereas I think the security and went through the trouble of reporting a few of those as such, whereas I think people on the security list, and I include myself here, thinks that since it's not exploitable, it just doesn't seem like a security vulnerability. It just seems like a bug in the implementation.
Yeah, I mean, I think documenting those things where there might be this, if it's not something that should be obvious to people reporting, it certainly would be good to document them. That's a perfect example of where if there's any disagreement, saying this is what we believe, either it'll lead to discussion and changing of that if that's the right thing, or at least that being the accepted thing, and it's easy to point to that as opposed to try and get into individual conversations when things are reported.
Where would such a thing go? Is there
I think that's part of what I was going to discuss later, but I think the feeling is that those kind of things would be in maybe a docs directory in the security working group or the README or something linked off the README. Like, I think the feeling is that the security working group repo is the place to document things about the process, even if it's not, where they get handled. It's where we could have the public documentation of what those processes are. So, for example, what I was going to bring up is, we want to document the security announcement process, for example, right, where it may not necessarily be people in this group who are doing the announcement, but it would still be this group of people who'd be interested in helping to document and formulate what that should be, right? And this is a public repo where we can actually, make that also publicly visible.
Okay. I'm not sure. I don't. I'm not sure I agree that it should be. No, that's strong words. I would tend to document the project policies in the Node.js node repo. I found it very difficult to find things when things are spread among repos and you land at Node.js node and you're wondering what the procedure is for backporting, but that's not there. It's over an LTS repo, which you didn't know about. Or even if you do know about it, you end up having to search across 2 or 3 repos. I think
Yeah, fair enough. That's sort of why I wanted to put it on the agenda to talk about what the right answer is.
Right. I'm willing to PR some text. That maybe would get more progress than an issue if I just PR'd some text and then people could comment on it.
I think that makes sense. The only question would be just like a generic PR with an @cc to this group, or discuss it here and then PR to the node group. I don't know, whatever would work the best.
Well, the discussion is not getting a lot of discussion here.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes a PR gets more discussion because more people see it, and then everybody can comment on the specific text rather than an abstract issue.
So even if we wanted to have the document live in the security working group, on the README of the main project, there is a security section where we could at least link out to it. That would, I guess, keep traffic down on the main repo.
Fair enough. So we could put the text here and add a link in the README?
Yeah, so, I mean, just as one of the probably few people who actually watches the main repo, anything that can kind of reduce traffic there, I think is good. So we could churn on this document all we wanted in the security working group without affecting the link to it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like, that's exactly the, is if putting it in the security repo, those kinds of things, does that then, help you focus who joins in and discusses and who sees it? But yeah, it's,
Okay, well, I can take a look at that, PRing some text for that. Any more to say for that now? Maybe not. Going. Okay. Can we improve the security reporting process for Node? So this was also partly a response to some comments from Dayan about the difficulty from outside of tracking the status of your vulnerability reports, but it also interacts with if we have to manage vulnerability submissions, we need a process. We need a place to store them where people can interact on them, where they can be private between the security triage group and the reporter. So Josh, you said you would be willing to take a look at some of the HackerOne, BugCrowd, a couple of different options, and maybe make a recommendation?
Yeah. I've kind of done a cursory look of both of them. Off the cuff, they both are free for open source projects. So that's nice because we don't have to worry about, financial resourcing. From personal experience as a submitter, I've liked HackerOne's kind of overall flow and UI a little better than BugCrowd, but I haven't used BugCrowd in around a year, so it's worth taking a look at again. I do need to delve into what it looks like kind of from the security manager side of things, so that I can, then give a reasonably good summary to the folks that would actually be using the tool to process incoming stuff.
Should we discuss?
But yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I was gonna say, should we discuss here what we think some of the important things that we want the tool to have, or should we leave that onto GitHub? Or did you want to just kind of propose a list of things that you think are important?
Well, I'd like input on the pain points that we're currently dealing with. since if we go and like delve into the various solutions, but they don't address like a very like something that's like a pretty hot button issue, we haven't made a ton of progress.
Okay, so the stuff I've heard of that I think are important is that there needs to be some way of limiting, like, I don't know how to say that, some way of limiting who can see a vulnerability during the kind of the pre-disclosure time.
Yeah.
To the reporter and in the node security, security triage group. And to after disclosure, I think the previously private history should be able, to become public. So people can kind of see the conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the third, I think the other thing is, I think in terms of us, we would want a way of, how do I say, like almost, we need a way for the data that's in there to somehow become available in a more structured form. Whether that means it has APIs and we can use these APIs to extract a JSON description, or, but I mean, there needs to be a publish. There needs to be a publish.
Linked to that, would you say that the ability for either the reporter or the person processing it to add tags and other metadata so that when we export it, it's easy to make sure that useful information is present? I mean, it could be as simple as just supporting like some custom labels to describe the vulnerability type and the vulnerability severity and stuff like that. Similar to GitHub labels.
Okay, well, those are the things I can think of off the top of my head that I think are most important. I mean, plus just general usability and Do you have any thoughts on that, like stuff that's important if we were going to adopt such a tool?
I don't think this is a big issue since it was kind of built into both of the platforms, but do we feel the need to have support for a bug bounty program in the event that, we either internally or in the event that one's ever sponsored?
I don't have any. I don't know. I don't know if if it didn't have support, but it was kind of good in all other ways. I don't think it would be a blocker.
Okay.
And if well, who would pay for bug bounties actually?
Well, one of the things we could do is the Core Infrastructure Initiative, which is a partnership between us and Facebook and some other orgs, offer like essentially open source grants for various security work. Among them, bug bounties if an open source project wants to run a bug bounty. So if we wanted to run a bug bounty and had like kind of a clear rationale for what the goals of it were and why we thought a bug bounty was a good approach to achieving those goals, it wouldn't be terribly hard for us to get the various like wallets here to open up and help sponsor that for Node. I say that because we are like my team is the ones that sit on the CII for Microsoft, so I have perhaps unreasonable influence in that process. But given the popularity of Node and its importance in the world, it's not an unjustified expense. Provided we have a solid this is our goal and this is why we think it would work.
Okay. How successful are they?
So my experience, since we've kind of run them internally across a variety of projects, is if you're mostly worried about like kind of one-off or complex issues that are not easily found with automation and you're fairly mature, Bug Bounty is a great way of just kind of helping get additional eyeballs to spot those otherwise hard to detect like problems. If you're still struggling with like just like basic security work, you're going to pay out the teeth for stuff that you could have found easily with tooling.
Do you have any sense of where we are on that spectrum with Node?
So I've run some tooling against Node, and most of the stuff, like I found the majority of stuff that seemed a little worrisome were over in the JavaScript engine that gets pulled in, and I would say that that's probably outside the scope of. I would imagine that Node would be mostly interested in code it owned as opposed to its dependencies, especially since Google should also be investing in the security of their JavaScript engine, and fairly clearly are. So my sense is that if Node has like any scary security issues, they're probably going to be like things that are like because of mistakes in a design or other more contextualized problems. They're not like, oh, hey, you have memory corruption here, or your JavaScript code, you're doing evals on like tainted input and that sort of thing. It seems, at least from like my past, it seemed like Node was in a pretty good shape regarding the like kind of easily automatable problems.
As an aside, those tools, are they something that we could automate to run periodically, automatically in the Node CIs?
So yes-ish. We have we're using a commercial tool called Semel, since it has it has one of the best analysis engines for multiple languages that we've seen. It would not be unreasonable for us to like help fund a license for that for you guys, and internally we already have it like basically an analysis pipeline built up so that we can just suck in like various open source projects, run the analysis, and then ping the repo owners if we find like stuff that's like worth kind of that heavy engagement. So we already have it source set up internally. It wouldn't be hard for us to like come up with a bit of money for the license for your project externally, especially since Semel already analyzes JavaScript for open source projects for free. You can go to lgtm.com or something like that. Looks good to me, and point it at a like say a repo for an npm or whatever, and it'll come back with results for you.
Right. So I mean, do you think that's something? Would it be valuable for us to be running that internally in the CI, or?
Yeah. I mean, and especially since it's what we like about Semel is that you can write fairly complex rules for very complex things very easily. Their query language that they use to understand this is quite good. And so like it has a lot of utility outside of security. So we also use it to spot all sorts of performance bottlenecks and that sort of thing. And I could see that being something that like it would provide broad value not just to this working group but to Node as a whole.
Yeah, that's what I just think that like this working group, one of the things should be like, what are all the different things we should do to make sure the project as a whole is doing, has all the good checks and balances, and if that's one that we can if you guys can pretty much contribute a config, and like you said, even the license that we then run, nightly or whenever the right interval is, it seems like something that would be good to do.
Yeah, we have like some of the SEML folks like just on campus, so I will swing by and talk with them. Especially since they already have a fairly permissive view of like providing services for open source. You know, not just getting the like licenses set up, but let's see if we can go like, hey, let's talk to various people to go what sort of custom rules make sense for this code base. What would interest the Node community, and
Right.
maybe we can get some resources in that direction, and also teach anyone who's interested how to write rules for their in their query language. And all of their rules are open source. Like they believe like they sell the analysis capability, but the actual analysis that gets run, the various rules, they don't think that's their secret sauce. So they're all, I want to say MIT license or something to that effect.
Right. Okay. Because I mean, I think we need, like, this group would need to help build the set of rules so that it runs. And I think you said that there were some problems, but I assume there's a way you can kind of say, well, we've seen that, disregard it, right?
Yeah. Well, and most of the stuff I looked at is like, okay, if this code ever changes so that taint gets in, this is a problem, but it doesn't look like there's a clear data flow that would allow malicious code in, or malicious data to get to here at this point.
Right.
But that's why we would want it in CI, because we could catch it the moment that changed.
Yeah, basically, like, what we'd want is, you don't want it to be too noisy, but if it's basically, running every night, and if there is something of concern, it pops red, that, and that happens infrequently enough, people will go take a look, and that's what you'd want for sure.
Our experience with it relative to many of the other commercial tools is where, another tool might report hundreds of issues, some will report dozens. But even if they aren't outright exploitable, you can look at them and go, that's probably dangerous, and maybe it's a priority 3 fix, but I should get to it. Where for a lot of the other commercial tools, it's like, well, that's a garbage result. Like one of the very popular commercial tools used to look for the substring word and flag it as a hard-coded password, which was not super useful in code that used D words and words all over the place.
Right. Okay. Well, it sounds like, if you can submit an issue suggesting, what you think would make sense on that front, that would be a good starting point.
And I'll do some legwork over here to see, like, hey, can we make it so that the only real concern from Node for running it is like kind of the amount of effort getting it into the CI, that things like licensing and all of that are taken care of.
Yeah, like, basically if it's I guess there's maybe some installation or whatever, but other than that, like, setting up a job that runs a script nightly is pretty simple. I could do something like that. It's the work if it requires work like installing and that kind of stuff.
Well, and we do have it set up to run via webhooks in Azure already, so I could also similarly, go and see if I can argue some free Azure compute out of the way, so that really it's just a matter of adding those webhooks into your Jenkins script or whatever powers your CI.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we're too worried about well, I don't know how many CPU cycles it does take, but generally we have quite a good infrastructure. It's just like if it takes anything to make a machine different from the other machines, that's where it starts to get a little more complicated.
Not really. Our experience is that it increases compile time by about 50%. And then, for things like, JavaScript that doesn't get compiled, it just adds straight on overhead, because otherwise you'd, do just a simple copy of those files.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's not huge. It is like, a build that took an hour might take an hour and a half, with like depending on the number of rules that you ran and their complexity. But like, I mean, internally, like, we found that the performance is fairly reasonable relative to a lot of other like very heavyweight solutions out there. I mean, you could grep for problems much cheaper and quicker, but you're also fairly limited in what you can find with grepping.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like we wouldn't put it into our regression run, which runs on every commit, but a nightly run would easily be handleable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's basically the same. Like we made that trade-off internally for our own stuff. Like, okay, we're not going to run it on every check-in, or but every nightly, whatever, it'll be ready by 8 in the morning anyway.
Yeah, we have a number of those kinds of jobs where like one runs once a night, and it's kind of the canary in case something goes wrong versus the instant response.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so this is the big issue. So we've been given the NSP data, so like a dump from the vulnerability database, and I PR'd, what a pretty, I mean, not a very serious PR, but I broke it up into the a JSON file per vulnerability, slightly pretty printed. And I guess the question is, what next? And where do we go from here? Resounding silence. I mean, maybe it's maybe the answer of how we store it is closely tied with how we manage vulnerability submission and reporting, like whether we use HackerOne or BugCrowd or something. Maybe it's there. But is our end goal to just have these as single files in a Git repository and let people use the Git API to access them? Is that where we're going to go? And if so, do we need a new Git repository or no?
I think that having individual JSON files in a Git repo, it's at least a fairly universal way of grabbing stuff. No one would have to go learn like a hacker. We might need to learn the HackerOne API internally or the BugCrowd or whatever to do that export. But for everyone who wanted to consume the data, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. It's something that they're probably quite used to at that point.
Yeah, the rubysec.com stuff looked really good. We might want to store it in JSON instead of YAML, but other than that, it looked really, really straightforward.
Do they have it in the Git repo? How's you, Danny?
Yeah, so RubySec do that over GitHub. So does the GWF initiative, the distributed weakness filing, kind of like the extension to CD assignment for third-party libraries, that this CD wasn't kind of like dealing or being able to keep up with the pace. So there is this initiative called the distributed weakness filing. I'll share a link in the chat here. So they do that over GitHub as well. There is a repository called VictimsDB, maintained by Red Hat. Same thing over GitHub. So I think it's a good place to start. Or again, for the consumption of data and the reporting, I think it's we need to have to think about how we do that. But for the consumption, I think GitHub is great here, and having the history, the history is also useful, and of course the all familiar GitHub flow, the R's and that. I do think it should be a separate repo. So whatever issues, things like that would be in that context.
Do you think it should be the security working group repo? Does anybody, I mean, nobody commented on my PR, so I wasn't too sure if people were horrified or just didn't notice.
I guess where else would it go?
Well, it could be a repo specific to vulnerabilities called something called not security working group, but vulnerabilities, for example.
I think we should just keep it in the same repo. We're already, as a project, starting to get too many repos going on.
Okay, but I mean that's pretty easy. Anyhow, some people want to comment on the. Is it worth merging this number 26, or should I just leave it there as a discussion point for a while?
Did you just say it was discussed in the meeting? The decision is for now to leave it in the same repo.
Sure, but does anybody want to review this? Should we merge it? Is the format okay?
I'll look at it, offline.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we'll probably merge it.
Same here. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, I'd like to see some comments just to know if this is where we are going forward. I mean, that'll help with looking at HackerOne as well, because one of whatever process we have, we would like. I mean, ultimately, we don't. I don't think anybody wants to be staring at the HackerOne UI and then typing out a JSON equivalent and PRing it by hand into this repo, right? So we'll need some kind of tooling or process around that. Are the CVSS vectors actually useful?
Well, it's not perfect, but I think it has good value. Basically, the security is derived from that score. It has some information as of like whether it's a remote exploitable, whether it's locally one, or like the impact, the confidentiality, integrity, and things like that. So I think it's standardized way of scoring vulnerabilities. So I do see value there.
Okay, an open question for me as well is whether we would want to have or need a CVE ID for every vulnerability. I know there's some overhead in applying for them all. I don't think Node hasn't applied for CVE IDs for all of its vulnerabilities in the past. There's some question of whether or not we should start doing that, whether it would be helpful to people to be able to refer to all vulnerabilities with an ID. Do we have any feelings about that?
It does. That would then cause the information to get into NVD and the National Vulnerability Database, and there's a whole lot of different kind of vulnerability management projects that pull out of that database because it's free. So it might make their lives a little easier, but I don't know how much it complicates our own lives.
Yeah, I didn't have so much luck with getting a CVE ID. Michael, you took a shot at it, and
I'm still waiting. I figured out the way to submit it based on the process. I haven't gotten one back yet. I do have one other action to follow up. I think we can end up becoming sort of the issuer. But I haven't had time to look into that. The other option too is that I think we might be able to request like a block of them. So, maybe that's something in between where we request like 10 of them and then we use them. But I guess I'm waiting to see if I actually hear back on my first request and then go from there. I'm probably at the point where I should be pinging them again to say what's going on, but
It's been a week now, or 8 or 9 days?
yeah, it's been at least that since I submitted the form.
So historically, for vulnerabilities in npm packages, we see that only around 20-30% of them get CVEs. So it's not clear whether it was like, well, clearly there was no attempt to get a CVE for all of them, but it is clear that there is a huge number of them coming in, and seems like they're deprioritized there. So I guess like the project I mentioned before, the distributed weakness filing basically makes this process easier. I personally submitted a bulk of vulnerabilities that haven't been approved yet for a month, pinging them every few weeks. So sorry for that noise. So that's a challenge for us, like process-wise.
Okay, so it's not just us who they're just slow in responding when you request a CVE number?
Sorry again?
So you're saying it's not specific to Node having troubles. It's generally the MITRE is slow in saying yes when you request them?
I do think that getting a CVE for Node, like a vulnerability in Node, should be much, much easier than getting a CVE for, say, an NPM package, whatever package it is. So there is a difference there. So I think they're not a very quick to respond in general, but I think it's much, much easier to get a CVE in, like a project like Node or whatever, like a Linux binary or things like that.
Okay.
That historically works well. Of course, like projects like OpenSSL, but when it comes to third-party libraries, not only in NPM but in general, it just doesn't happen. And when it's like the attempt is made, it just takes a long time. So CVEs, NPM packages, vulnerabilities in NPM packages that got CVEs, they date back to 2014 and 15. After that, it's just like didn't happen. So I guess they just gave up on that. But it's my guess. I haven't personally confirmed that. Just,
okay. Does the distributed weakness filing project help with that, or do they still? I mean, are they just a middle? I think in the middle, or do they issue their own IDs?
Yeah, so they got like a range, a CVE range to manage themselves, to assign it and make it like collaborative over GitHub. And it's supposed to solve exactly that bottleneck. Again, my personal experience that it didn't work. So just one data point, but that's my personal experience. I think obviously if that's like the Node Foundation, it would make it work better. That's my guess. But maybe they're just have their own lot of reports, or I don't know. But I think for us, we could just consider, bulk filing them every period we decide on. I wouldn't block a vulnerability, like by CV number assignment. That I think would cost and make our process more cumbersome.
Right, makes sense. Okay. Is there anything else we have to think about for rehosting? I mean, one thing I can think of is naming. What should we call it? We shouldn't be calling it the NSP vulnerability database anymore. Should we do we need to give it and I don't think I mean, it's going to go in a repo called security-wg, so that's not a great name for it. should we agree on a name, like the Node Foundation vulnerability database, or?
I think npm should be there somehow, because we're talking about npm packages, unlike the previous issue discussed where we talked about the Node engine itself. So I'm not sure like where like it's tricky with like npm themselves, or but this is like an npm packages vulnerability database. That's what it is.
Well, it might be also include Node itself if I.
Oh, right, like the runtime, right? You're right. Yeah.
But
So wasn't the idea to put the Node security project into the foundation? If so, we could just call it the Node security project. And then there's also issue number 4 about what to call this. William Kapke had a good recommendation, the Node Security Committee, which oversees the Node security project.
so I do not believe that the NSP was donating their trademark name to the Node Foundation. They continue to maintain NSP as a website, NSP as a command line tool, and they didn't donate the command line tool.
Okay, that's fair enough then.
So even though it isn't really, it's kind of an obvious name. I mean, they chose it for good reasons. I think it's their name, and we have to come up with another one.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that is that they renamed the project to Node Security Platform, so it's not Node Security Project. I'm not sure what they are doing with the project, like the original name, but I think yeah, like worth like not getting into these confusions on our side.
Would that be something we should run by Adam Baldwin and or someone from the foundation?
Yeah, I think it's worth it. Sorry guys, I have to leave for another call, so I'll catch up on the minutes summary, and as promised, I'll review the PR.
Okay, thanks for coming, Danny.
Thank you, goodbye.
Yeah, we are hitting, I don't know if we have to cap it at exactly an hour, but should I open naming as its own issue?
It already exists, issue number 4.
I think that was the name for the working group.
Yeah, it's the name for the working group, and then they kind of get into what to call the project, but I guess it wouldn't hurt to have
Oh, I see. Sorry, Colin, I cut you off. I apologize. I was mumbling to myself.
No, I was just saying, I don't think it would hurt either way to have a separate issue or to keep it on the existing one. Doesn't matter to me.
Okay. Okay. So we probably just need some more response, and I can ping issue number 4. I mean, we need to probably just agree more on it. Is there anything else anybody wants to say things we should think about or put on as a to-do list for rehosting the data?
I already took a look at your pull request while we were on the meeting.
Okay.
It generally looks good. Left a couple of comments.
Great.
I think if we get back onto a regularly scheduled meeting, I think we can knock out all of these issues in a couple weeks.
Cool. As a last issue that we didn't talk about here, this is the what is this security an issue? Do we need to keep this one open? I mean, there was basically a decision I think made not to apply to the, or anyhow, I don't have any opinion. As far as I can tell, there's no particular advantages or disadvantages for being a formally ratified working group. So I don't have any strong feelings about whether we should try to become a real working group, or.
I really wouldn't worry about it until, if there's lots of activity or there's an area where the group wants autonomy over something, I wouldn't worry too much about that side of things.
Okay. Should we close the issue and just say that we're an ad hoc group, or leave it open, or Michael, do you want to comment on this issue 11 just as to its current unofficial but happy state or something?
You could just say, we figure we're in the incubation state. Once enough has been done / accomplished / there's ongoing work, we'll revisit this.
I would close out and say that we can always reopen it later whenever, if we need to.
Yeah, I was going to say that sort of comment and then close, right?
Okay, that's a couple things closed. The other two items on the agenda then that got added were making the meeting recurring. How often should it be? Every 3 weeks? Every 4 weeks? Do we even need it every 2 weeks, or is that too much? Seems like too much to me.
Yeah, I'd say either 2 weeks or a month.
Okay.
Certainly, I guess you can make it every 3. Like, I'm thinking in the calendar. I'm not the monthly one starts to get into some question of how you tell it when in the month. If you do it like every 4 weeks or something, it's you can easily say just every 4 weeks on Thursday or whatever.
Okay. Well, I'm happy with every 4 weeks. That's more frequent than we've been doing it, but it doesn't seem excessive. So.
That seems like a perfectly good way to start. And if it's not enough, you can change it. If it's too much, you can also change it.
Yeah. I guess that means that just after we do every meeting, somebody like I, for example, could open another issue for the next one 4 weeks away, and then it'll be
good. I know for some of the other ones we tend to open it the week before, but it may be better to open it in advance for sure.
Okay. So Michael, can you put it in the calendar?
Yeah. So let me do that as we speak. When it's like every 4 weeks on what's today? Thursday?
Yeah, today's Thursday the 13th.
That was 3 Eastern, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Does time work for people? For people here, does anybody have any complaints about it? Or?
Works for me.
Looks fine for me.
Okay, so the next time, today's the 13th, 27th. So the next one will be Thursday, the August 10th.
Okay. I don't know if there's more to say about that. I think that covers that. And then, Michael, you wanted to talk about security release processes.
Right. So not so much getting into the discussion on them themselves, but there is a discussion. Well, I opened a couple of issues in the security repo saying, hey, we should document the security announcement process. I did it for the first time on this release. And I think it's a good opportunity to write down what the steps are so that, whoever does it can follow a set of established steps. I don't think there's any reason for that to be private, the process itself. So, I opened it there just to start the discussion because that's where people have been involved in it. But my thought was, maybe we should move the discussion over to the security working group repo. But, and really what I wanted to put on the agenda was just validating that, that makes sense to everybody here, that this group would discuss and sort of basically manage capturing and documenting those processes. And there's probably be a few of them. It was like the security announcement process. I think also the security release process. in terms of like what the steps are that people need to do to actually make a security release, because there are some things that are, well, certainly different than, making commits to our regular repos and stuff like that. So really it's just the sanity check that, yeah, it belongs with this working group and in the repo, or I guess they're two separate questions, really. One, do people agree that that's something that this working group it's in the interest and scope of? And then separately, I guess we can talk about where the actual artifact should end up.
So if we're going to start handling, core things in this group, then I think it makes sense. Right now we have nothing but ecosystem things. But
so this group isn't going to handle. I think that the way I've heard it explained is that security group would still be the one that handles the actual work of managing the vulnerabilities, but that this group would be, would have the scope, not restricted to modules. It would be to all security, anything related to Node. It just wouldn't necessarily implement the processes which require a tighter group. Right.
So this working group isn't going to be, in charge of the private repo and responding to security inquiries. But like I said, if we're going to, like, for example, in our vulnerabilities GitHub repo, if we're going to list core things and, just have anything else to do with Node core, then I think it makes sense for us to also own, it's just documentation. It's not like, it's not like there's anything sensitive in there.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's sort of the way I was looking at it, so it's good to hear. It sounds like 1+1 on that front.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is, I mean, I'm generally in favor, but it's difficult for people who are not on the security list to know what the processes are, or like if you've never seen the processes carried out because it all happens in private.
Well, I think that's where, I'll take a cut. Having gone through the release process, I'll take a cut, and then it'll be publicly documented, right? And we'll expect people who are in the security repo to comment on that in addition to this group, right? And then similarly for the other one. So yeah, I 100% agree that it would be very difficult for this group to write down the first cut. But if we can get people who are involved in how it's done today to write down the first cut, it then gives us a point where other people can contribute and suggest different things and stuff like that.
What about the ongoing discussion of who should be members of that security triage group? Is that going to move out here as well? Or?
Yeah, I guess James opened one in the TSC repo.
We probably don't need to spread the conversation too wide now.
I have a feeling, in the end, I think all those things should kind of gravitate into this working group, because it's kind of, I think the working group, at least in my mind, it's like we have a group of things that are sort of logically in the same area, and then people who are interested in that area can subscribe. Sort of what, back to what Colin was saying, is that, rather than putting in the general one and everybody gets to hear about it, we're putting it somewhere where people who are particularly interested in this area can subscribe. And I think that, that one in particular probably should migrate into this area. Now that, there's already 3 or 4 issues, I wouldn't necessarily say try and move them, but over time, hopefully we can make it the place to open those kinds of discussions.
Right. James, the one in the TSC is specifically about the security disclosure policy. It's not about the membership of the Node.js security group.
Right. There's a couple, yeah. So the other 2, you're right, are possibly still in the security repo. Yeah, I mean, I think we should encourage those discussions. If it's not something that has to be done in private, in the security repo, we should encourage them to come to be external, and this would be a good place to encourage them to take place.
I'm a fan of that. I mean, I know sometimes public conversations can be messy, but it should be clear what the criteria is and why some people are part of the security group, and how to become a member, or if it's possible to become a member. Or
yep. Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. I don't know. Yeah, I'd almost like if you want to throw a comment in there saying, hey, you know, is this a conversation we can have more publicly? How about over here in the security working group?
Yeah, I did comment to that effect.
Oh, okay. Then when I next read up on them, I'll +1 that from my perspective, and we can see how that goes.
Okay. I think that was it on the agenda side, and we've gone a little bit over. I don't know. Just call it a. Is that good? Is there any other things to bring up, or?
Not with me.
I think we're good. If we only went 15 minutes over after not meeting for 6 months, I think that's a win.
I guess the only other thing we do in some of the meetings is give people who are on the YouTube viewers, if they have any questions, they could post them into the original issue, and we could try and answer them. That's the only other thing that we might do before we finish off.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions? Can you see the YouTube channel?
I don't. Let's see. I don't know how to do that. I can see there's 4 viewers, but I'm just suggesting if people are viewing, post your issue into the original, your question into the original issue for the meeting. In GitHub, we'll wait for a minute, and if something shows up, answer it. Otherwise, we'll call it a day.
And also, my IRC is off. I'm just looking in Node.js.
Yeah, that's the other one. Yeah, okay, that's the other place to.
Give it a minute or two.
Yeah. Oops.
I don't see anything. Maybe we can call it a meeting.
Okay, great. I'll stop the broadcast and talk to you guys next time.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Colin.
All right.